Rock stars are famous for being a bit, well, temperamental, and you ain't kidding. Take a huge ego, keep it awake for days out on the road, add a few drugs to the mix, and you've got a recipe for a verbal explosion loud enough to rock a stadium. Living in the spotlight has got to be pretty stressful, and it's understandable that some of these folks crack every now and then. But occasionally, their eruptions are pure comedic fury, with unhinged tirades that reach new depths of obscenity and profanity. Here's a few of the greatest drummers that had some outlandish outbreaks that by most fan standards are considered normal, at least for these guys.
Are you a drummer?
Here are 10 of the greatest drummers of all time and their wild antics. Buddy Rich. Rich was generally described as an upbeat and friendly person, but was also known for his temper. Singer Dusty Springfield slapped him after several days of putting up with Rich's insults and showbiz sabotage. He held a rivalry with Frank Sinatra, which sometimes ended in brawls when both were members of Tommy Dorsey's band. Billy Cobham said that he met Rich in a club and asked him to sign his snare drum, but Rich dropped it down the stairs. At the time, Rich was prone to heart attacks and poor back structure following a surgery removing 2 of his spinal discs. Rich also took a strong disliking towards band leaders. He claimed that the musicians hardly looked at the band leader and that the drummer is the real quarterback of the band. Sure they are. Rich's temper was documented in a series of secret recordings made on tour buses and in dressing rooms by pianist Lee Musiker, who concealed a compact tape recorder in his clothing while on tour with Rich in the early 1980s. On one recording, Rich threatens to fire trombonist Dave Panicci for having a beard. Although he threatened many times to fire members of his band, he seldom did so, and for the most part, he praised his musicians in television and in print interviews. Keith Moon. Moon the Loon summed up the Who drummer Keith Moon, a restless ball of energy on and off stage. Moon defined rock and roll bad boy behavior when allegedly driving a Rolls-Royce into a swimming pool. And honestly, who wouldn't? Fondly remembered by most who knew him, Keith Moon chose some wild company to hang with, including the Beatles' John Lennon and Ringo Starr, drummer John Bonham, and an assortment of actors. Along with John Bonham, Keith is probably the most respected drummer in rock history. More of a drinker than a drug user, Keith Moon died when he was oddly cleaning up his act. Keith Moon's drinking problem escalated in 1970 after he ran over and killed his own chauffeur after some English skinheads had been attacking Moon's Bentley. In the commotion, the chauffeur had come out of the car to protest, and sadly, as Moon tried to steer the car away from danger, the Who drummer was unaware that his own chauffeur was under the wheels. Some of Moon's crazy exploits included, but were not limited to, his love of explosives. And hey, who doesn't love a good explosive? He used them not only in his own performances, but would hide M80s in his friends' drum kits. He knocked his own front teeth out while naked at his 21st birthday party, and he also loved groupies. And when he returned from a U.S. tour, he gave his long-suffering wife the clap, the gift that keeps on giving. He oddly had a public broadcast system installed on his Rolls-Royce and would drive around London's suburbs making convincing and terrifying public service announcements. Because why not? Unfortunately, the drink, drugs, and reckless regard for personal safety caught up with the self-proclaimed world's greatest drummer in 1978. On September 7th, Moon died after overdosing on pills ironically prescribed to help him sober up. Like John Bonham, he was just 32. Ginger Baker. Nicknamed Ginger because of his red hair and a member of the group Cream, arguably the most powerful trio of the psychedelic age, Ginger Baker radically upped the ante for rock drumming and outrageous behavior. A jazz drummer who wandered into rock and roll at a moment of stylistic upheaval, Baker introduced a level of complexity and fearless experimentation to the form that he more than matched off stage. As a septuagenarian retired to an estate in South Africa before he died, Baker's life has consisted of drug-induced wanderings across the globe, addictions, divorces, and bankruptcies in between stints behind the kit with cream and blind faith. He once decided to kick a heroin habit by driving across the Sahara, because how else do you kick drug habits? Notoriously, Baker hated doing interviews and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind. On many occasions, Baker was outright abusive towards interviewers and unconcerned about looking brutish in front of audiences. By the end of his life, Baker was virtually deaf, and who wouldn't be after playing drums like that? But he had a truly volatile relationship with his Cream bandmate Jack Bruce. Such was Ginger's temper that he once attacked Bruce with a knife during a performance. What a guy. What's worse is that the feud lasted the rest of their lives. Even when Bruce called Ginger to inform him that he was dying, Bruce took it as an opportunity to insult Ginger one last time. John Bonham. This Led Zeppelin drummer was esteemed for his speed, power, fast-bass drumming, distinctive sound, and a feel for the groove. John has been regarded as one of the greatest and most influential rock drummers in history. In 2016, Rolling Stone ranked him first in its list of the 100 greatest drummers of all time. And why shouldn't he be? A heavy drinker, John was known to have consumed 4 quadruple vodka screwdrivers, which is equivalent to around 9 to 13 American standard drinks at the rehearsal studio, plus the other drinks he consumed that day. He could drink a fish underwater. According to the coroner's report, the drummer had the equivalent of 40 vodka shots in his system. A few of his known wild antics were while staying at the Hollywood Chateau Marmont Hotel, Bonham decided to ride a motorcycle through the lobby of the hotel. He was buddies with the likes of Keith Moon and Oliver Reed. And Ringo Starr was once a victim of Bonham and Reed's pranks when they shaved his head and eyebrows, including the time all three were arrested for drunkenness in France along with Inspector Clouseau himself, Peter Sellers. When Robert Plant did a libidinous performance of Whole Lotta Love, wrapping his leg around the mic stand and simulating a sexual act, it proved too much for Bonham's mother Joan, who strode to the front of the venue demanding at the top of her voice, "John, you get off those drums now. You're not playing with that boy. He's a pervert." And she should know. Steven Adler. When a band with as much dramatic excess as Guns N' Roses fires a member on account of drug abuse, it's clearly a serious problem. You think? By May of 1990, the band had lost patience with Steven Adler's inability to control his heroin and cocaine habit. The drummer was once recalled as crawling on the floor with his nose to the carpet trying to inhale cocaine remnants he had spilled. Adler later sued GNR for $26 million, claiming that they fired him for being a junkie despite introducing him to drugs in the first place. Go figure. Once, Adler broke his hand in a fistfight when he swung, missed, and clocked a streetlight post. What did the streetlight post ever do to you, man? With a tour pressing, the band soldiered on, enlisting another affable timekeeper, Cinderella's Fred Curry, to man the kit. Slash, his girlfriend, and Steven Adler were inhaling their way through a mountain of cocaine with Nikki Sixx at the Franklin Plaza 2 days before Christmas in 1987. According to Adler's memoir, the drummer left the room to shoot up, and when he came back, the door would hardly budge. Nikki's unconscious body was blocking it. Adler still had his hand in a cast, but he shouldered his way in, found that Slash and his girl had left, and dragged Sixx with one arm into the shower. When cold water didn't revive him, Adler started smashing the OD'd crew member in the face with his cast, eventually slapping him back to life. The next day, Adler went to the hospital to see Sixx, who asked, "Stevie, what the hell happened to me last night? My face is killing me."
Good drummer. Good drummer. Good drummer. Good drummer.
The band would later become infamous for their drug and alcohol abuse, and Steven would go on to suffer 28 overdoses, 2 heart attacks, and a stroke. It couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Topper Headon. During punk's early years, back when it was actually kind of threatening, the idea of getting kicked out of a punk band for bad behavior probably seemed like a conceptual contradiction. But Clash drummer Topper Headon managed to achieve that seeming impossibility when the rest of the group gave him a boot in 1982. Despite the fact that he had written and recorded Rock the Casbah, the Clash's most successful single ever, Headon's drug use had ballooned to the point where he had a roadie ready with a mirror full of cocaine to snort between songs when the stage lights went down. And when he wasn't doing blow, he was doing heroin. They do say variety is the spice of life. After Headon was fired, the Casbah royalty check started rolling in, and Headon spent it all on drugs. And why wouldn't you? And within a couple of years, he was making his living as a busker with a set of bongos in London's underground stations. Bill Ward.
The drummer from Aerosmith?
Anyone who could put up with Ozzy Osbourne off and on for over 4 decades has to be fairly nuts. But Black Sabbath drummer Bill Ward has repeatedly proven that he's possessed by a special kind of crazy. One fan favorite story is how during a chemical fuel recording session, Sabbath guitarist Tony Iommi mischievously asked Ward if he could set him on fire. Ward refused, saying that he wanted to keep his mind on work. Work comes first, fellas. But at the end of the day, after he'd wrapped up things, Ward told Iommi, "I'm going home now, so if you want, you can set fire to me." The guitarist took him up on the offer, and after being doused in alcohol and set afire, Ward ended up in the hospital with 3rd-degree burns. Iommi remembers, "Bill says, 'Are you going to set fire to me, Tony?' I tipped rubbing alcohol all over him. Normally it just burned off, but this time it soaked into his clothes, so when I lit it, he went up like a bomb. He was rolling on the floor, shouting and screaming. I thought it was part of the joke, so I poured more stuff on him. We had to get an ambulance for Bill, because you know, yelling and screaming when you're on fire is actually funny." One time, Iommi found a can of gold paint and decided to turn Ward into a shiny Oscar statue. We were staying at John DuPont's house in Los Angeles, the bloke who owned DuPont Paint Products. We found all this paint in the garage and thought it would be fun to paint Bill gold from head to toe. The guitarist may have started the prank as a joke, but things suddenly got a lot more serious. He started having convulsions. The ambulance people gave us a right chewing out. "You idiots, you could have killed him." They gave him adrenaline and we had to use paint stripper to get it off. He looked like a beetroot by the end. Terry Bozzio. Best known to music fans as one of the best drummers to back up Frank Zappa, and later as a member of the new wave outfit Missing Persons, Terry Bozzio became a legend among musicians for assembling one of the most outrageously elaborate drum sets of all time. Dubbed the SS Bozzio, the kit consists of some 3 dozen drums and 2 dozen cymbals, as well as an assortment of gongs, tambourines, and other assorted percussion instruments. When it's fully assembled, the SS Bozzio displaces approximately the same volume of space as a compact SUV and is a monument to the philosophy that too much is always better than not enough.
Holy shit.
Carmen Appia. Rock drummer Carmen Appia co-wrote a #1 hit song, Rod Stewart's Do You Think I'm Sexy, and played with everyone from Jeff Beck to Pink Floyd, befriended his idol drum legend Buddy Rich, and even, to hear him tell it, influenced Led Zeppelin. Yeah, sure. Having openly admitted to sleeping with over 4,500 women, Carmen could give even Gene Simmons some stiff competition, if you know what I'm saying, because hey, that's what drummers do. But one of his stranger achievements was patrolling hotel hallways as a member of the Sex Police. The group would listen for anyone in the band or crew having sex and sabotage these encounters any way they could. Once inside the room, they would cause as much mayhem as possible. Beds might get tipped over, or sometimes the girl would be thrown out of the room without her clothes. Normally, she would take one look at the 10 to 15 guys bursting into the room and leave of her own accord anyway. In his new memoir, he makes it clear that having sex with groupies and trashing hotel rooms, often alongside the biggest rock stars of the era, was his reason for existence. Where do I sign up at? Tommy Lee. If you've ever read Motley Crue's group autobiography, The Dirt, you'll get the picture that a complete account of Tommy Lee's most outrageous behavior would fill several thick books of Lee just by that alone. During the period in the 1980s, when the Crue was one of the biggest rock bands in the world, the group's globetrotting tours were fueled by a steady diet of vodka, cocaine, and something Lee calls zombie dust, a blend of cocaine and the sedative halcyon that he says keeps the body awake but shuts the brain off, and boasted a flying drum kit that allowed him to perform drum solos while suspended above the heads of the audience. At home, Lee was a contender for the world record for the number of supermodels a rock star's been involved with, and with his wife and co-star Pamela Anderson, he accidentally invented the famous celebrity sex tape.
Thanks, rock drummer Tommy Lee!
Some of the most outrageous things Tommy Lee did were tours with a Jägermeister machine and acted as the enabling bartender backstage. And oddly, he was on a lifelong quest to acquire hepatitis C. Why? We don't know. It's just something weird rock stars do. Among other notable achievements were him doing time for domestic abuse, fighting with Kid Rock, and Lee and Six would apparently shatter bottles over one another's heads and swallow whole light bulbs for fun. Talk about your bright ideas. In fact, the band's behavior was so wild that when they were slated to open for Kiss, who themselves are known for rock and roll excess, Gene Simmons reportedly kicked them off the tour for being too over the top. Talk about your principles. We should say that it's not a requirement to be this nuts to be a drummer in a rock and roll band, but if you're looking to stand out from the rest of the group, being slightly or all the way crazy helps. But it doesn't mean you'll be as notorious as these guys are. Fortunately, most of them lived through those crazy times and persevered. But we don't suggest taking things to the extreme, as not all of us can be as lucky as these guys were, and it's also not good for long-term health. Gee, you really think? Until next time.